and I have been engaged in for the past about 10 years on social psychology of opinion-based groups. More specifically, we are interested in groups where there is a bimodal asymmetrical distribution of opinions. In such groups, there are two distinct factions. One, numerically dominant majority, and numerically infrequent minority. And as important as numbers are, it's not the numbers that interest us. It's the psychology behind these numbers. And there is very rich psychology behind these numbers. Most importantly, majorities have many advantages over minorities, which can be classified in three broad categories. Elites notwithstanding, it is majorities that are socially validated, that have this sense of right, of correctness, of their opinion being the way the world is. But in addition to this very important psychological benefit, there are some very real, tangible benefits. And then again, with size comes the easier access to some very tangible resources, including power. And finally, majority satisfies a very real, very important psychological need for belonging. This is not to say that minorities cannot have all these three things satisfied. They can. But in contrast to majorities that get this by default, minorities have to work on satisfaction of these needs. So this asymmetry in psychological and tangible benefits that is associated with a majority and minority motivates attempts to social change. In other words, what is behind social influence is this desire to turn minorities into majorities, which ipso facto turns majorities to minorities. As one of my colleagues put it very nicely, there is nothing wrong with being an opinion-based minority. It is tragic to remain so. So, knowing that, this is what minorities are trying to do. They try to exert social influence to attract some converts to their position, and by virtue of attracting these converts, they switch factions within the group. Former minority becomes majority, and vice versa. So, what I'm going to talk to you is about three levels of effects of this social change. Effects on a group as a whole, on intra-group relations, how majorities and minorities interact in the aftermath of social change, and this is particularly interesting, influence of the social change on cognitive efficacy at the very individual level. So how do we do that? You may ask, well, what's to study at the group level? If minorities become majorities, the group is still the same, right? It still has majority, it still has minority, so the more things change, the more they stay the same. Or do they? Let's find out. Here is how we go about studying this. We bring to lab a naive participant, typically Psychology 101 student, and a number of my research, undergraduate research assistants. We present a situation as, say, a group discussion, opinions of exchanges. We motivated this naive participant to work really hard because we say, okay, if at the end your opinion prevails, you get your experimental hours doubled. Oh my. That is highly attractive. It means they are done, they satisfy their course requirement, they are out of here. So, when we want to place a subject in opinion-based majority, we have most of research assistants, my confederates, agree with whatever the subject says. We had anywhere between, say, 5 and in one case, nine confederates. Conversely, when we want to put a participant in opinion-based minority, we have most of confederates disagree with them. And keep these initially established distribution of opinions stable. However, when we want to realize social change, we start just like in stable majority. But halfway through the interaction, some of the initial supporters desert the participant, thereby changing their position to minority. And finally, the opposite is the case with a change from minority to majority. So what happens at the group level? How do these people feel about this group that either degraded them, if you will, from majority to minority, or elevated them to this much desired majority position? We measured something that's called group identification. In essence, it is the extent to which a person accepts the group as their own, and they feel themselves as belonging to this group. So across many studies, we measured this group identification and looked how stable majority compares to this majority that was turned into minority. Not surprisingly, when a group takes away from a person this desired position, they detach from the group, promptly and very dramatically. These are results of some meta-analysis here, so those of you who are in meta-analysis see what the effect size is. But that's not terribly surprising. What is surprising is a reaction of those people who went from minority to majority. We are asking them, how do you feel about this group that has elevated you to the position that you value? And here is how they feel. So what's wrong here? They do like their newly acquired position, but they still reject the group that has afforded that position to them. So in trying to understand this phenomenon, we thought about the very psychological process that afforded them the position. And this psychological process is the process of conversion. Conversion is very interesting psychologically. Whereas minorities want converts to their position, there is also a negative connotation to conversion. If these people came to my side, well, how stable they are. And by extension, how stable is my position. So what we've established is that immediately in the aftermath of social change, these new majorities feel rather insecure about the group. And it's, of course, there are ways how you can increase this security. One way was to keep their newly acquired majority position last over a period of time. And that's what we did. We brought people to lab in week 1, put them in the minority. Not surprisingly, they rejected the group. We brought them back week 2, and they are still rejecting the group, but a little bit less. Week 3, a little bit less. Week 4, finally we got them over that neutral, but they are still not buying this group. It was only in week 5 that finally they are, and thank goodness because we could go week 6 or 7 because the semester would have been over. But what is interesting is to compare how these 5 weeks in the majority, I'm telling you, I am with you. Honest to God, converted to a position, how do they compare to those people who spent only 1 week with the group, and we ask them the same question, and you see that there is still difference. Even after 5 weeks, they are kind of suspicious about this group. And okay, that's very good. So if this insecurity about the position is important, it should affect how new majorities interact with minorities. Another thing, and you probably are going to be intrigued by this given current political situation, another factor that we looked at is level of social support for power abuse. So we thought that insecure majorities, insecure new majorities, in combination with social support for abuse of minorities is going to spell a real disaster for new minorities. And that's exactly what we found. We looked at 2 aspects of power abuse. We can abuse power by favoring our own group, by giving ourselves more resources than them. This is what I call majority favoritism. When we looked at majority favoritism, the extent to which new majorities grabbed more resources than they gave to new minorities, we found that insecure new majorities grabbed more when there was no support for abuse. When there was support for abuse, they went all for their resources. It didn't matter whether they were secure or insecure. But then we looked at a much harsher level of abuse, and that is minority derogation. The level of which was operationalized with such things as you're going to give these people very derogating labels to wear while they are in the lab. And here is what we got. In the absence of support, people are sticking to sort of implied social norm. We don't do this to people, right? But look at what happens when there is social support. And we created social support by planting our research associate who created this normative support. In that case, look what insecure majorities are doing. They are abusing new minority. Okay, this is about power abuse. Let's look at third level of effect, and that is how social change affects something that is inherently thought of as intra-personal characteristic, our ability to think and formulate arguments. So what you're about to see are two videos, and I would like you to pay attention to both verbal and non-verbal aspects of participants' behavior, where he's responding to some questions about socially relevant issues in the context of this group interaction, and I will not tell you what level.
Should the U.S. give financial assistance to underdeveloped and third world countries?
Yes, I say if we spend a lot on foreign aid, and this is the third world is the future of the planet. I mean, the population is expanding in third world countries, and if we don't give them assistance, who knows how much they might continue to, just pollute the environment. And, if we give them assistance to maybe develop without, destroying the environment and somewhat protecting human rights, then they can be brought into the first world. So I'd say yes, as long as there are conditions attached to the money.
Should categories such as biracial and multiracial be added to currently used racial ethnic categories on government forms and census records?
I suppose so. I don't see why it's a pertinent issue, but I see no reason to not add those categories, so yes, they should be added.
The same person, about half an hour difference, what happened? The person lost social support. And whereas he answered the first question by stating clearly yes, and then providing quite elaborate arguments, preservation of the environment, human rights, strings attached, here he's struggling to state his position. He lost majority position to find himself in the minority. The way we think is powerfully socially regulated by the level of social support. We found this generalization to a number of other situations. So in the interest of time, I will skip this one and just go to the conclusions. So I would say that social change, even when it is desired, even when it is from worse to the better, is challenging. What we can do to meet these challenges is to define groups, when possible, in terms of diversity of opinions rather than dominance of any one opinion. But of course, this is possible in some groups, such as work groups. It is less possible in other groups. We have to work on creating normative support for social construction of most, but by no means all, differences as diversity versus deviance. We should divorce numerical representation of opinions from differential access to valued outcomes. And above all, social change amplifies our need for people to limit powers over themselves. And I will conclude by acknowledging my collaborators, my graduate students, and my army of undergraduate Confederates without whom this would not have been possible. Thank you.
Questions for Radmila?
Just two really quick questions, Radmila. Thank you. That was excellent. Are any of these findings moderated by the topic of the opinion, the content, and also by gender?
We played with the host opinions, from legalization of marijuana, which was a beautiful topic because it is bimodally distributed prior to it was legalized, to death penalty. We did not find anything. So we did not have sufficient number of participants to look at the interaction effect between gender and the topic, which probably would have be interesting because we know from prior research on social influence that there are gender differences, but they are moderated by a topic. So if you ask me about, say, Chopin's music, you're not going to influence me much. But whereas, say, I don't know, are there gender differences in the kind of music? The more gender stereotypical the topic is, the more difficult it is to influence a person.
So I'm going to follow up with a somewhat related question, and I have two. First is, have you looked at any kind of inoculation process that might alter these results with some sort of a experimental moderator that's built in at the front end before the switch occurs? Second question is, can you speculate on how that might work with Trump?
I have not personally run the studies where I would manipulate inoculation, but we know from prior research on social influence that indeed you can inoculate people by exposing them, just like in medicine, by exposing them to a small amount of counter-arguments and having them practice counter-argumentation. Another inoculation is through social support. Actually, we did have one study in which we brought in outside participants, again, my researcher, and that really helped. How can this play into the current political situation? Not so good, because if my results are generalizable at all, the apparent social support for some of the political ideas currently being discussed in presidential campaign, it spells nothing good. But then again, I ran my study in the lab, things are more complicated. Though I'll share this with you. When I submitted one of my first studies to a journal, and there I received, as always, critical feedback, but one was, well, this really does not work in real life. Thank goodness for Republicans, they shut down the government, demonstrating that although at the time they became new majority, they behaved just like minority. They did me a favor. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, my question comes because I started to read this book called Whistling Vivaldi that Jennifer Imazaki is wanting to use as a reading group to see how minority students struggle. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was kind of shocking to read that because this author really shows that when you tell students, oh, you are good at this subject, that they do much better. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering, because you had these different group of Psychology 101, mm-hmm. So when these students were suddenly made part of the majority, did that affect their grades in the class?
I have actually another line of research that speaks more directly to your question, and it is a research on so-called stereotype threat. It is knowledge that your minority position associates you with a failure in a field. So, for example, some ethnic groups are stereotyped as better in math than others. women are stereotyped as less able in math than others. So what we did in one of my studies, and this was master's thesis of my student, is we manipulated how this was presented. When we presented this stereotype in the lab and say, women are so stereotyped as not so capable in math, and we have such disadvantage, the stereotype hit, and when we gave them SAT tests that mimic lab tests, they really failed. When we presented the very same data, but framed them differently, and we said, okay, women have been stereotyped, but look how far we've gone. Look how far we've made since the 50s. The same numbers, just differently framed. We were able, in some cases, to reverse the effect. So it does matter how we talk about stereotypes, if you will. I could go on and on, but